He always knocked twice, once soft and quick habitual. The second time slower, more deliberate. Like he was giving me time to decide. That night, I opened the door on the second knock, and I should have closed it before I even saw his face. It was Aaron, my husband's oldest friend, his best man at our wedding, the one who helped us move into this house, the one who knew every crack in our marriage before we admitted they were there. And tonight, he looked at me differently. I brought the bottle you like he said, holding up a Cabernet and a half-hearted smile. Mark said he'd be working late again. I stepped aside. Of course Mark was working late. Again. The lights inside were dim. The air was heavy thick with the scent of roasted garlic and disappointment. I had cooked dinner. I had waited. And then I had accepted again that I'd be eating alone. Only I wasn't. Aaron set the wine on the counter, loosened his jacket, and exhaled like he was exhaling more than air. Like he was releasing something he'd been holding in too long. "Do you ever get tired of pretending?" he asked. The question wasn't about dinner. It wasn't even about Mark. It was about us, whatever us had become. I didn't answer, not out loud. Instead, I poured 2 glasses of wine and handed him 1 fingers, brushing too long, too familiar. He sat on the edge of the couch, same as he had a dozen times before. But this time his eyes followed me in a way they hadn't before. Or maybe I'd just finally let myself notice. We talked. About nothing. About everything. And sometime between the second glass and the third, I realized something terrifying. Aaron knew me better than my husband did. He always had. And maybe I had always let him. He leaned in just slightly enough to make the air between us vibrate. Enough to make me feel something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Seen, heard, wanted. And as the wind brushed against the window panes and the hour grew later, I told him something I hadn't even told myself. I think I'm starting to disappear in this house. His response wasn't words. It was the way his hand found mine. Steady, familiar, wrong. And yet, I didn't pull away. That night after Aaron left, I stood in the kitchen long after the clock passed midnight. The wine glasses were still on the table. His scent, clean soap and cedar still clung to the cushions. And in the silence, I realized something devastating. I hadn't felt that alive in months. Not with Mark. Not even with myself. The next morning, Mark barely noticed the untouched dinner or the faint scent of wine in the air. He kissed me on the cheek out of habit, not affection, then mumbled something about meetings and deadlines, and left without asking if I had slept well. I hadn't, because every time I closed my eyes, I remembered the way Aaron had looked at me like I was still someone worth looking at. We hadn't kissed. We hadn't crossed that line. But emotionally, I think I had already stepped over it. Aaron didn't text me the next day, or the day after, and maybe that made it worse, because it gave me space to imagine. Was he regretting the closeness? Was he trying to protect me? Or was he waiting for me to make the next move? I busied myself with errands I didn't need cleaned rooms that were already spotless baked things I didn't plan to eat. Anything to quiet the storm in my chest, but the storm only grew louder. By Friday, I caved. I sent him a simple message. "You left your sunglasses here." I didn't expect a reply. But he sent one almost instantly. Maybe I left them on purpose. I stared at the screen. I should have ignored it. I should have deleted the whole conversation. But I typed back, "Come get them then." His reply came just as fast. "Are you sure?" I wasn't. But I said, "Yes." When he arrived, we didn't speak right away. He stood in the doorway just like he had before. But this time his knock didn't feel like a visit. It felt like a confession. We sat on the couch again, not touching, not drinking, just listening to the tension, to the silence, to everything that hadn't been said. "I keep thinking about the other night," he said finally. "I shouldn't." "But you do," I whispered. He nodded. "I do." I looked down at my hands. "So do I." He leaned forward. "Tell me to stop and I will, right now." My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear my own voice. "I can't," I said. And then for the first time he kissed me. Slow, uncertain, desperate. I let it happen. I wanted it to happen. And while my husband slept soundly across the city, buried in spreadsheets and late-night meetings, I let my loyalty slip away one heartbeat at a time. I didn't tell Mark. Of course I didn't. What could I possibly say? Hey honey, while you were buried in conference calls and quarterly reports, your best friend kissed me like I was the center of the universe. No. I smiled. I made his coffee. I listened to him talk about work. I pretended nothing had changed. But everything had. My body was in our home. My thoughts were still on Aaron's mouth. That kiss, it wasn't long or dramatic or anything you'd see in a movie. It was restrained, gentle, hesitant. But behind it was a tidal wave of everything we hadn't dared say out loud. I had crossed a line, and worse, I wanted to cross it again. The guilt didn't come the way I expected. It wasn't sharp or crushing. It was dull, lingering. A constant ache in my chest that pulsed every time Mark looked at me with casual indifference. He didn't know, but I think on some level he felt something shift. That night, as we lay in bed, our backs facing each other as always, he reached out and touched my hip. Just a small touch, but it felt like a test. I froze. I didn't know what I was afraid of more, that he'd keep going, or that he wouldn't. When he didn't move, I whispered, "Are you okay?" He sighed, just tired. Always somewhere else. And here I was carrying a secret like a second skin, lying inches away from the man I'd once promised to love forever. The next morning, I got another message from Aaron. Just one line. "I didn't sleep last night." Neither did I. But instead of texting back, I stared at the screen for what felt like hours. Then I deleted it. Not because I was strong, but because I knew if I replied, I wouldn't stop. Later that afternoon, he showed up at my doorstep again. I hadn't invited him, but I didn't send him away. He didn't kiss me this time. He didn't need to. We just stood there, two people dangling on the edge of something they couldn't name. "I just needed to see you," he said. And God help me. I was glad he came. Aaron and I didn't talk about what happened. We didn't plan the next time. We didn't even say it would happen again. But somehow, we both knew it would. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was heavy, loaded. A pause before the next inevitable act. The second time he came over when Mark was out of town for a conference. 3 days. Just 3 days. Mark had kissed me goodbye at the airport, distracted, tapping at his phone, even as he hugged me. "I'll call when I land," he said. I nodded, "Safe travels." But my heart didn't move. My chest didn't ache when he walked away. I felt nothing. That scared me more than anything. Aaron showed up later that night with takeout. "Thought you might want company," he said. We didn't eat much. The food went cold as we talked. And not just surface-level things like work or weather. We talked real talk. About loneliness. About resentment. About all the quiet ways we bury ourselves in roles we didn't choose but kept performing anyway. I told him things I never told Mark. And he listened like every word mattered. At some point, he reached over and took my hand. Just held it. No rush, no demand, like he was grounding me. I didn't pull away this time either. He kissed me again, but this time there was no hesitation. It wasn't a stolen moment anymore. It was a choice. We ended up in the guest room, not our marital bed. That was an unspoken line we weren't ready to cross. Yet. But still, everything about that night was real, and raw, and wrong. I kept waiting for the shame to hit, but it didn't come. Instead, there was relief, as if I had finally let myself feel something I'd been starving for. I lay awake beside Aaron for hours, tracing the shape of his breath in the dark. "I shouldn't be here," he murmured. "I know, but I don't want to leave." "I don't want you to," I whispered. And that was it. The moment I stopped pretending this was just a mistake, it wasn't. It was something. And it was only just beginning. When I woke up, the sun was just peeking through the blinds. Aaron was still asleep beside me, peaceful, unaware of the war happening in my chest. I sat up slowly, careful not to wake him, and stared at the soft light painting the wall. This wasn't a dream. It wasn't a fantasy I could brush off in the daylight. It was real. His shirt was on the floor. My ring was still on my finger. And my husband was 200 miles away, probably sipping hotel coffee, blissfully unaware that his best friend had been in his wife's bed. Or rather, the guest bed. Because even in betrayal, I had set boundaries. Thin, fragile, meaningless boundaries. Aaron left before noon. He kissed my forehead before walking out the door. It wasn't passionate, it wasn't possessive. It was tender. Too tender. That scared me more than anything else, because I knew then this wasn't going to fade. This wasn't just physical. It wasn't over. And worse, I didn't want it to be. Mark called around 2 p.m. He asked how I was doing, told me about his meetings, asked if I needed anything. I smiled through every word, lied through my teeth, told him I was fine, that I missed him, that I couldn't wait for him to be home. And while I said all the right things, I wiped Aaron's name from my call log. I washed the guest sheets 3 times like that could scrub the truth. And I caught myself glancing at the door more than once, hoping, dreading, longing that Aaron might come back. I wasn't a liar, not until now. But suddenly lying felt like armor, like the only way to keep this secret world alive. That night, I stood in the mirror brushing my hair, and I looked at myself differently. Not as a wife, not even as a woman, but as someone split in two. One version of me was dutiful, stable, safe. The other hungry, curious, awake. Mark came home 2 days later. He brought me a souvenir from the airport gift shop, a snow globe. He said it made him think of our honeymoon in Colorado. I smiled, said it was sweet. And as he kissed me on the forehead the same way Aaron had, I couldn't tell who that gesture belonged to anymore. The first night Mark was home, I couldn't sleep. He lay next to me, breathing softly, peacefully. Just like always, his arm was slung across my waist, a gesture that used to comfort me. Now it felt like a borrowed memory, familiar but hollow. I watched the ceiling fan spin in lazy circles and wondered if he could feel it. The distance, the change. I told myself I still loved him, and maybe I did. But it wasn't the kind of love that made your skin tingle when someone touched you. It wasn't the kind of love that made you ache when they walked out the door. It was the kind of love you carry like laundry, routine, necessary, heavy. The days that followed were quiet. Mark was more attentive, maybe sensing something was off. He brought home dinner, suggested a movie night, even rubbed my shoulders while I did the dishes. And I let him. I let him touch me with those hands that used to feel like home. But all I could think about was Aaron's hands, how they trembled when he kissed me, how they gripped my hips like he was afraid I'd disappear. It wasn't fair to either of them, and yet I couldn't stop. Aaron didn't reach out right away. He was giving me space, or maybe giving himself time to regret. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I missed him like a secret craving one I didn't dare name out loud. Until the 4th day. That's when I saw him again. Not planned, not expected. I was at the grocery store picking out oranges when I looked up, and there he was. Our eyes locked. The world around us vanished, just for a second. He didn't smile. I didn't wave. But somehow that moment felt more intimate than anything we had done. That night he texted, "You looked beautiful today." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "I didn't expect to see you." His reply came quickly. "I didn't expect to miss you this much." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just infidelity. This wasn't just lust. This was something that could burn down everything if I let it. But the worst part, I wasn't sure I wanted to put out the fire. A week passed before it happened again. A week of pretending, of smiling at Mark like nothing was shifting beneath my skin, of sleeping beside him with a body that flinched at his touch, not because it was unwelcome, but because it wasn't him. Aaron. Every glance we stole since the grocery store had been like stepping closer to a cliff's edge. And on Friday night, I jumped. Mark was away again, just for the evening, a late client dinner. He even encouraged me to rest to take the night off. So I did. I put on the softest sweater I owned, the one that made me feel safe, but a little exposed. I didn't mean to text Aaron, but my fingers moved before my conscience could stop them. "He's out." That was all I said. 5 minutes later, "Do you want me to come over?" My heart knocked against my ribs. Yes, God, yes. But I waited a full 10 minutes before replying. Doors unlocked. He didn't knock. When he stepped inside, I was already sitting on the couch legs curled beneath me, pretending to watch a sitcom I wasn't really hearing. He stood there silently for a beat too long. Then he walked toward me. Slow, deliberate. We didn't talk. Not right away. His hand brushed mine. My breath caught. The moment stretched and cracked like a fragile plate. I whispered we shouldn't. He whispered back, "I know." But neither of us moved away. What happened next wasn't rushed or wild. It was intentional, measured. Like we were unwrapping each other slowly, carefully, as if afraid of what we might find underneath, but needing to find it anyway. We didn't even make it to the bedroom. It happened right there on the couch between half-finished wine glasses and the hum of a refrigerator in the background. And afterward, we didn't speak. We lay side by side facing the ceiling, our fingers grazing. And when Aaron whispered, "This is going to end badly," I replied, "I know." But I didn't ask him to leave. And he didn't offer to go. The next morning was oddly peaceful. Aaron had left before sunrise, quiet as a ghost, careful not to leave a trace. The wine glasses were rinsed. The couch cushions fluffed. But no matter how perfect the scene looked, I wasn't the same. Something inside me had shifted again. Not shattered, not broken. Just rearranged. Mark came home around 9 a.m. He was holding coffee and a warm cinnamon roll in a paper bag.
"Thought I'd surprise you," he said.
I kissed his cheek. That's sweet. But even as I smiled, I wondered, had he noticed the couch? The barely detectable scent of Aaron's cologne still lingering in the air? Had he noticed me? No. He kissed me again and told me I looked rested. Maybe that was the worst part. That he couldn't even see what was different. Later that day, I tried to write. I used to journal often small, quiet confessions to myself. Now, the page stared back at me, blank and judgmental. I wanted to tell the truth. I wanted to bleed words and set them on fire. But the guilt refused to come out in ink. So instead, I wrote, "Sometimes the most dangerous kind of love is the one that doesn't feel dangerous at all." Then I closed the notebook and hid it behind old cookbooks in the pantry. Aaron and I didn't talk for 3 days. Not a text, not a glance. But every time my phone buzzed, my pulse jumped. And when he finally messaged me, it was just 3 words. "I miss you." I stared at it for what felt like an hour. Then I replied, "I know." That was all it took to bring us back. Not to another moment on the couch, not yet, but to something just as intimate. He called me that night. We didn't talk about sex. We talked about us. He told me things he never told anyone. How he envied Mark, not just for his career or his family, but for the way I looked at him when we first met. He said you used to light up around him. I didn't deny it. But I whispered not anymore. Silence. Then, "Do you light up around me?" I didn't answer. Because silence was the only answer I could give without telling a bigger lie. It wasn't always grand gestures. Most days, it was the small things that stung the most. Mark would come up behind me while I cooked, wrap his arms around my waist and rest his chin on my shoulder. And I would freeze just for a second. Not because I didn't love him, but because I couldn't stop comparing his embrace to Aaron's. It was Aaron who now occupied the quiet corners of my mind. Aaron who I looked for at every backyard barbecue, every neighborhood run-in, every dinner invite. I hated myself for it, but not enough to stop. There was one evening that broke me in the most unexpected way. Mark and I had dinner with Aaron and his girlfriend Chelsea. She was sweet, funny, effortless. Everything I once was. She reached across the table to wipe something from Aaron's cheek. He smiled at her like she was a warm fireplace in winter. And I hated her. Not because she was awful, but because she was good. I excused myself halfway through dessert and locked myself in the bathroom. I stared at my reflection and whispered, "You're the villain in your own story." Later that night, Aaron messaged me, "I saw your face at dinner. You don't have to say it. I felt it too." I didn't reply. Not because I didn't want to, but because Chelsea's laugh was still echoing in my ears. And I hated how much it hurt. A few days later, I bumped into Aaron at the hardware store. Alone. We walked side by side down the lighting aisle pretending to browse. But neither of us was looking at the bulbs. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. He didn't believe me. He stepped closer. Too close. And in a whisper that sounded like a secret prayer, he said, "We're playing with fire." I looked at him, really looked at him, and I whispered back, "Then why does it feel like the only thing keeping me warms?" We didn't touch. Not that day. But the look he gave me before he walked away, it lingered. Long after I left, long after I crawled into bed next to my husband, long after I closed my eyes and dreamed about a life that wasn't mine to live. The guilt had changed shape. It wasn't sharp anymore, wasn't stabbing. It was dull, constant. Like the ache of a bruise you keep pressing just to feel something. And yet, I kept going back. Not to Aaron's arms always, but to his presence, his voice, his knowing. There was a magnetism to him now. One I didn't want to resist. Because resisting meant losing the only person who saw me. And Mark, sweet, loyal Mark, he still didn't see anything. One afternoon, Mark came home early. I was on the phone with Aaron. Nothing inappropriate, just laughter, just memories we pretended not to be making. But when the door opened, I panicked. I hung up mid-sentence. Mark walked in holding flowers. He kissed my forehead. Just because he said, I wanted to cry. Because I didn't deserve that kindness. Because a small part of me wished they were from someone else. That night, I sat on the balcony alone. Aaron texted, "Did I get you in trouble?" I replied, "No, but I got myself in deeper." He sent back a single word. Same. Then after a moment, if this were a map, how far have we crossed? I stared at the screen breath caught in my throat, and I answered with the only truth I had. We're not even on the map anymore. The next morning, Aaron dropped by, unannounced, just to return a book he borrowed from Mark months ago. They stood in the foyer, laughing like old times. Mark had no idea. None. And I stood in the kitchen, holding a mug I wasn't drinking from praying my hands wouldn't shake. When Mark stepped away to take a call, Aaron looked at me. Just looked, and I knew what he was saying without a single word. We had crossed every line we'd drawn. The only question now was how much further would we go? It was supposed to be over after that night on the couch. We both told ourselves that was the line and we had crossed it. But we'd never cross it again. That lie felt comforting, until it wasn't. It happened again one rainy Tuesday. Mark was at a company retreat 2 hours away. Storms had knocked out our power lines. The house was dark, flickering with candlelight. And Aaron had texted innocently enough, "Do you still hate storms?" I replied, "Only when I'm alone." 10 minutes later, he was at my door. This time, we didn't even pretend to hesitate. We didn't speak during not much anyway. Just breathless gasps and half-whispered names. There was nothing soft about this one. It was desperate, clumsy wrong in every conceivable way. And yet, it was the most alive I'd felt in years. Afterward, we lay side by side on the living room rug, raindrops tapping the windows like fingers of guilt. Aaron turned to me and said, "We're not good people." I stared at the ceiling and said, maybe good people get tired too. I told myself I would stop, that this would be the final page of a chapter no one would ever read. But the truth, it was never just once, never just curiosity. This was longing dressed up as a secret. Loneliness wrapped in skin. And with each meeting, I lost a piece of myself I didn't know I could spare. 3 days later, Aaron's girlfriend showed up at our house, Chelsea. She smiled sweet as ever, holding a pie she'd baked for us just because. And as we all stood in the kitchen, Mark, Chelsea, Aaron, and me, I wondered, would anyone else smell the smoke on us? Because we were burning, silently, secretly, and the flames were getting higher. Chelsea's laugh filled our kitchen like the scent of the pie warm innocent undeserved. She told a story about Aaron fumbling with a grill last weekend. Mark laughed so hard he nearly spilled his drink. I smiled too, but my stomach twisted. Because the punchline of her story wasn't funny to me. The real joke, we were all standing in a house full of landmines, pretending it was a garden. Aaron caught my eye just once while she talked. It was fleeting, less than a second. But it said everything. You remember, don't you? The rug beneath us. The things we didn't say but couldn't take back. I excused myself to the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the tub trying to breathe. This had gone too far, but I didn't know how to make it stop. That night, Mark said something that shook me more than anything Aaron had ever done. He brushed my hair back while I was in bed and whispered, "You seem far away lately. Are you okay?" I froze. That simple question, gentle, sincere, felt like a dagger. Because the one person I was betraying the most still trusted me without question. "I'm fine," I whispered. Another lie. Another wait. The next day, Aaron texted me. "Last night felt wrong in the worst way. Do you regret it?" I asked. He didn't answer for an hour. Then came, "Only because I don't want to stop." And that's when I realized we had passed the point of no return. Not because of the affair, but because the lie had become home. When I looked at Mark, now all I saw was a countdown. Not to a confession, but to a collapse of everything we'd built. Everything I was too weak to protect. Because my heart no longer beat for my husband. It beat for a man who smiled across the dinner table and wiped crumbs from my lips when no one was looking. There comes a point in every secret where silence becomes unbearable. Not because someone's about to find out, but because you can no longer carry it. That night, Mark surprised me with an impromptu date night. Just us, no friends, no distractions. Dinner at our favorite old spot. The one with dim lighting and soft jazz. The place where he first told me he wanted to marry me. I wore red. He said I looked beautiful. I smiled, but something in me cracked. He talked about us moving, maybe starting fresh somewhere quieter. He said, I feel like we've been distant lately. Maybe we just need a reset. He wasn't accusing. He wasn't angry. He was hopeful. And that made it worse, because hope is a fragile thing. And I had already stepped on it with muddy shoes. Back at home, we sat on the porch. The sky above was velvet black, sprinkled with stars. Mark held my hand and said softly, if there's anything you want to tell me, ever you can. My heart thundered in my chest. I turned to him, lips parting. This was my moment, the one where I could be free. I opened my mouth to speak, and my phone buzzed. It was Aaron. Can I see you tomorrow? Just that. 7 words, but enough to pull me back into the spiral. I turned to Mark, swallowing my truth. And I said, I love you. I'm just tired lately, that's all. He kissed my forehead. And I hated how easy I made it for him to believe me. That night, I lay awake beside him. Mark snored lightly, peacefully inches from me. And I stared at the ceiling thinking, how did I get here? Not in his bed, not in his life, but in this prison of my own making, built from glances, lies, and whispered names in the dark. The following afternoon, Aaron asked me to meet him. He said it was important. We met in the same spot we always did, an old park 2 towns over where no one knew us, where shadows from tall trees gave us just enough cover for what we were ashamed of but couldn't stop chasing. When I got there, he was already waiting, hands in his pockets, eyes distant. He didn't smile when he saw me. That was the first sign. I think Chelsea knows, he said. My blood turned cold. She asked me last night if I still loved her, and when I didn't answer right away, she started crying. I sat down beside him, suddenly shaky. He looked at me, jaw tense. I didn't say anything, but I think she feels it, feels us. I wanted to ask what us meant anymore. Were we still a thing, a mistake, a chapter? But I didn't, because my own life was already too close to unraveling. I told him about the night with Mark, the dinner, the porch, the almost confession. Aaron said nothing. Then he looked at me with the kind of finality that doesn't need words. We have to stop. I nodded, even though I didn't want to. Even though it felt like ripping off skin, not just a Band-Aid. We stood up to leave. No kiss, no embrace. Just a hollow take care and the echo of footsteps moving in opposite directions. For the first time in months, I felt truly alone. And yet, a small part of me exhaled. Because secrets, especially the heavy ones, demand space. And space was all I had now. When I got home, Mark was waiting in the living room. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even confused. He just said softly, I saw your texts. My heart stopped. All of them. He didn't shout, didn't accuse. He just looked at me like he didn't recognize me anymore. And then finally, was any of it real? I opened my mouth. No words came. Because what do you say when the person you betrayed still manages to ask that question with love in his eyes? Mark didn't scream. He didn't throw things. He didn't ask me for details. He just sat there, quiet, like a man watching the waves swallow the last corner of a house he built with his own hands. I'm not going to ask why he finally said. Because I think I already know. I stopped seeing you when I looked at you. I stopped asking how you were. I stopped choosing you. His voice cracked and I broke. Because the truth was, he hadn't been the only one who stopped choosing. I had too. I never meant for it to happen, I whispered. He gave a sad smile. But you let it. And there it was. The sentence that rang truer than any vow. Yes, I had let it. Again and again. With my silences. With my stolen glances. With every lie that curled up beside him at night and whispered, everything's fine. The days after were a blur. Mark didn't ask me to leave. He didn't pack his bags either. We became shadows passing in a house that used to hold laughter. Chelsea, I heard, left Aaron. Moved out 2 days later. No fireworks. Just the quiet sound of something ending. It's been months now. Mark and I still live together. Still eat dinner sometimes. Still talk. But there's a distance between us that no apology can bridge. And as for Aaron, I haven't seen him since that day in the park. Sometimes I wonder if he ever drives past our old house. If he thinks about the rug we once laid on, whispering things we'd never admit under sunlight. This is my confession. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve it. But I needed to say it out loud to someone. To anyone. Because sometimes silence becomes its own sin. And secrets, well, they always find a way to come home. Thank you for listening to He Was My Husband's Closest Friend and My Closest Confession.